Question of the day today: how well do you know the structure of the American education system? In today's topic, we're going to be exploring the differences between the public and private institution of education that serve our students, specifically Kamehameha schools. Now, if you've been tuning into recent episodes of the podcast, then you are aware of the ongoing conversation that we've been having around accredited heritage versus inherited heritage. Well, our guest today has a unique perspective on the matter and will be sharing his professional expertise and personal opinion, among other things. All that and more on Pacifica Voices podcast. What is up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Happy Friday from the Kingdom of Tonga. I am your host, Tonga Victoria, along with my co-host, Michael Laulu. And we are so excited to bring to you all another conversation around culture, heritage, entrepreneurship. Laulu, how are you doing today, sir?
Well, everything is fine right now. Um, Glad to be here. Good to be alive.
Good to
Yeah.
be alive, right? With everything that's happening with Anamatangi, I wanted to kind of give you the space right now because I know I can just read off our mission statement, which is Anamatangi Polynesian Voices is a Silicon Valley based organization that advances systems impacted communities using heritage preservation and civic engagement. You can read that line by line, word for word on our website. But being our resident historian, being someone who was there when the name was entitled to us and installed to us by King Dubo IV, could you share a little bit on really what is the vision of Anamatangi that was given to us by the king? What was his vision for the organization?
Well, at the time, my impression of it was there was actually a conference at Stanford University, and it was under King Bofa's healthy lifestyle, His Majesty's healthy lifestyle, which was already started in Tonga. So it was brought to Stanford, and the king at the time was visiting his doctors at Stanford. And so from there, a conference came out of it with Dr. Palmer, who was the president doctor. And so the purpose of it was health first, was health, physical health. Now our people have diabetes numbers are way off the roof and heart failure and cancer. So it was to bring awareness to our culture of what we eat, how we eat, when we eat, exercise, and also just well-being. So that was the intention in the beginning, was just health, and then bridging that with culture. So Armatangi was a location for Queen Salote to conduct her songs, compose. So it was kind of like a getaway. So it's actually a place for curation of arts and culture. And so Armatangi represents that arts and culture. So to everything you said, which was much more syllables than what I'm about to say, it was just basically culture, art, and health. And this happens to be Tongans, but it's for all people. Because at the conference we had people from all over the world over there, and it was on Stanford University. So that's a nutshell on Matangi, and we're still continuing on with that. With all of the work that we've done, whether it's youth, the Elevation campaign, it still has culture in there. It has civic engagement. It has historic preservation. Even if we tell stories about our culture, reference points, and just the whole dichotomy of it. And in today's topic with public schools, I know personally, being a product of private and public, I'll be honest, I like private better, but you got to pay for it. And public is somebody else is paying for it, is the tax dollars. So I'll just leave it there, but that's pretty much a nutshell. I know you got a big program today, so I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you so much, Laulu, for giving really the origin story. I think that's a great way to start every podcast. Wow, I'm dealing with a cold right now, so I don't know if it's the flu that continues to just plague our our like our house environment. But with that being said, drink water. Make sure you're drinking water today. Um, and again, I think starting off with our origin story, kind of positioning ourselves to take on some of the conversation that we want to have today. I know that we are in the spirit of continuing the work since 1997 when we were installed the title. We are at East Palo Academy. Shout out to EPAA. Shout out to Principal Amaka. Shout out to the Poly Club for showing up in our YEC space. I know, Laulu, you've been in the space working as a teacher instructor of the many hats that you wear, teaching the dances that will be um, performed at the May event, and more details to come on that. Any other kind of events that are happening on the ground, the grassroots level, that you want to tag right now?
No, just the May 26th, the EPA Academy. So that's more of an internal thing. But so far, everywhere we go, Aramatang, it is an event, whether we're at 7-Eleven or the Hawaiian barbecue place, meeting our people. And I think to gauge conversations on this is a really good, we could take this topic offline and go to our churches, go to the Kava Circle, and
Right.
go to our youth and see what happens. And on Facebook, there's going to be people that have comments on it. So I feel like this is a good place, and I think it'll spread out and maybe it'll continue on to other people who are looking to be a part of supporting Armatang.
Yes, Pacifica Voices podcast. If you're just now joining us, we are going live. And I have a little bit of a dry throat, so my apologies. But we're going live today with Malele, who will be in the space very soon, talking about his experience working in the public school system, the private school system, and all other things. And before we get into that, kind of back to our question of the day, how well do you know the structure of the American education system? I feel like when we talk about what's happening in our local school districts, what's happening really at our individual schools, we sometimes lose sight that those are attached and connected to a much larger machine, which is our U.S. State Department of Education. And I'm just going to be quite honest, I didn't even know who our Secretary of Education was. Do you know who that is, Lolo, without cheating and Googling it?
No, I don't.
Right. I didn't know at all either. I had to Google that. And sadly, I had to Google it in preparation for today's podcast. But I think that just goes to show that we got to stay informed. I'm speaking for me. I will say I have to stay informed on matters of what is happening in our education system. And because not only am I a parent, I am a mother, but because we serve youth, this is a very important type of knowledge when we're looking at the foundations of our work and the programs that we have for our youth. So that being said, Miguel Cardona, if you didn't know, that probably will be a Jeopardy question somewhere in the near future. Who was our state Secretary of Education back in the pandemic era? So I'll give you the answer. It was Dr. Miguel Cardona. And some of the functions of our Secretary of Education, as well as our U.S. Department of Education, is really to kind of create a curriculum for I don't know how many students we have here in America. I'll say let's play with the number 2 billion, maybe, to create a national curriculum for 2 billion students that will then be trickled down all the way to the elementary school level, for which all students are measured on academic excellency, on extracurricular activities within the school, programs that we're seeing, different elective classes that are being introduced into the classroom. All of that comes from the domain of the U.S. Department of Education. And this is important to today's conversation because our guest has worked in the realm of U.S. Department of Education, and also is now currently working in the Kamehameha schools, which is not at all publicly funded. And I will let our guest speak more into that. But really allowing ourselves to kind of see in comparison how curriculum is designed, especially in a school and an institution that puts and prioritizes heritage, which is an incredible topic that we're going to explore further. So, without anything more to say, I did want to introduce and bring into the studio our guest for today, Malele. Thank you for joining us today, Malele. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I'm honored and privileged to be invited to talk about a subject that I spent majority of my adult life in, and a lot of great conversations that me and my family have over surrounding education. Would love to share that with you folks today and whoever's watching.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for making time and being on our podcast today. But before we get into the nitty gritty, the core meat of our conversation, can you share a little bit about your background, your lineage, your family?
Right on. My name is Malele Malele. I was born and raised in Carson, California. Graduated from Carson High School in 2002 and went to Berkeley. Studied architecture in Berkeley, and in 2006 graduated from Berkeley with a bachelor's of arts in architecture. And then I also have to include, when I applied to Berkeley, part of my personal statement. I remember very distinctly that I put on my personal statement that I wanted to create a family culture of Maleles at Berkeley, and so that was it. Came into fruition the year after. My one of my younger brothers, or my younger brother, ended up coming to Cal. We went to Cal together, and then year after that, one of our other younger brothers came up and played football at Cal. So there was three of us Maleles at Cal at the same time. My two younger brothers played football there. I was just there for school, for academics. After I finished, I went back to LA, worked in architecture, worked in the industry for a little bit before deciding to go back to grad school, which is what brought me to Hawaii in 2008. Went to UH Manoa School of Architecture. Study the program it's a professional degree, but it was called a doctorate of architecture. Um, let's see, and I'll get to my career a little bit later, but I wanted to give homage to my lineage, my family lineage. My last name comes from Fangaitua in American Samoa. My dad was born and raised in Fangaitua. Um, his mom is from Vatia. Little, that was a long story, but my dad moved from Fangaitua and lived and grew up in Vatia. I've been to Vatia and I've always seen pictures of Vatia since, and I think it's the most beautiful places on in Samoa. My mom was born and raised in Waimanalo, in Oahu, in Hawaii. Her mom is from Whangalu, and her dad is from Nua and Setanga in Tutuila. Um, they moved. I think my mom was in high school already when they moved to Carson, California. My dad moved to California when he was about middle school. Both him and my mom met at Carson High School. They didn't start dating until after they graduated. They started their family there in Carson, California, and um, the rest is history from that point. Um, when during the time I was at UH Manoa, One of my good friends, was already a teacher. She was teaching at Farrington High School in Oahu. The demographic there is mostly like Filipino kids, but they had one of the biggest populations of Samoan students at Farrington. There's a lot of Micronesian students, Filipinos, and Hawaiian students there. Um, but I was invited to do so. Hold on. The My friend taught ninth grade English, and at that time they were doing the whole ninth grade class was doing um, a research project on college and careers. And so my friend invited me over. They got the whole ninth grade class at Farrington together in a big auditorium. There's a few of us that presented our college and career experiences. So of course, I went and did my presentation about architecture, my school or my schooling at Cal and at UH. And then about a week later, my friend calls me back and she says, "Mel, I don't." Oh, my nickname is Mel. Um,
No.
so she called me up and she said, "Mel, I don't know what you did, but now all the Samoan students want to go to Cal and do architecture." And so, at that point, I was like, I think it was the first time ever that I realized my career and college, path was um, like it was inspirational for younger Samoan kids. It's the first time that I ever realized that. And so I thought that I could have, such a bigger impact, with students. So she invited me back to the classroom, ended up, helping students with their essays, and the principal loved me. And so the principal asked if I can stick around a little bit more on campus, and it ended up being uh, um, they brought me in on like an emergency hire type of deal
Oh,
at the school, where they gave me a whole ninth grade class to teach for the whole school year. Um, I didn't really have too much background on like education, as far as pedagogy. The I didn't go through any formal training on how to be a teacher. I was just kind of, you know, thrown into it, and the credentials kind of came later. Um, so during my time at Farrington, I ended up becoming one of the academy lead teachers. At that school, they had uh, sports academies. They had about 5 or 6 different academies. There was an engineering academy, a health academy, a performing arts academy, and one of the academies that I was the lead teacher of was called the Sports Academy.
were you
And
serving a lot of Polynesian youth during the
yeah, yeah,
academy? Okay. And
I'd say
was the emergency hire because there were a lot of Polynesian youth, and I'm sure the retention rates were not great.
so. The Not sure if you've ever heard of Teach for America.
Yes.
So they had one of the highest turnover rates in
Mm,
Hawaii.
oh, okay.
They The teachers would come here, thinking that they're going to come teach in paradise and just get a culture shock, and then not end up liking it, so they would leave. And so, you know, the principal didn't like, that the fact that they were losing so much teachers.
And
There
why
was
was that?
also
Why were teachers why was the turnover rate so high?
I think so. There's two different reasons. The two reasons that I know of. One was a lot of teachers were coming in with the military, and they were only stationed here for so long that they would when they would leave, that position became vacant.
Mm,
The other reason was the Teach for America teachers. I mean, they weren't sticking around for the long haul. So there was a need for more, teachers who would, permanent, look for
right.
tenure. And
And was
so
that something that you were thinking about at the time? Where you're like, okay, I'm pursuing my tenure, or did it come out of this need or this experience that you had um, with the students?
You know what? I think for me, mostly it became the money was good, and so I kind
Mm,
of stuck with it. At that time I was not employed because I was in college, um, and um, I just had the need to find somewhere to start making some money. And then the teaching just became more and more serious. They would ask me for more and more responsibility, and as I took it, the pay went up.
yeah,
And so yeah, that's kind of what kept me there. But as I was there for the money, I learned so much about education. Um, and then the avenue that I took to becoming a teacher was much different. It was a lot different than most traditional teachers are being brought in to the schools. Um, which is one of the things I wanted to bring up. Um, I appreciate teachers and how much they put into studying on how to be a teacher, but so much of the American education right now is going towards career readiness, and so a lot of schools are going into these academy schools, academy type of structures where these academies are aligned with certain career pathways, like engineering, like health. Um, what are some of the other academies they have? Humanities,
right,
and so they have these academies that are supposed to um, build interest in students to go into those industries and be ready for it as soon as they're done with high school. And if they wanted to go to college, yeah, it's a good option. But the whole idea is to have students be career ready by the time they're done with high school. And to me, the problem is you have teachers who are, going through um, the traditional way of becoming credentialed, and you're putting them in a class and then telling them to have some sort of relevancy towards engineering when they had no engineering experience because all their college was how to be a teacher, a good classroom
right,
teacher, but
yeah,
they have no engineering experience. And so, how can you tell a teacher to go to an engineering academy and teach something about engineering when they're not? And that's kind of where I feel that I kind of benefited. I came from a profession other than education, and I was able to gain experience and knowledge from a different um, industry, and then coming into education. And so, I had a whole nother world experience before I came into the classroom. And so, a lot of my curriculum, I was able to teach from that experience.
great. That's so
Yeah.
good. And I love that you pulled and connected kind of the real world practical experience, and then also the perhaps the gaps of pursuing a teacher's credential and then coming into the classroom, realizing that the pathways of to career readiness, just um, teachers who only have a teaching background are deficient in teaching. And so I think kind of back to the intro that we're talking about is the American education system. How well prepared are our teachers going into the classroom? And I know that that is a conversation we can continue on. I wanted to ask because you have such a beautiful experience. I mean, just hearing about how you got into is it Farrington High
Yep.
School? Like that's such a unicorn experience that doesn't happen to many, where the credentials come after the classroom. I know for
Mhm.
sure for me, like I was trying to get into the classroom when I first graduated from college, and they were like, "Do you have a teacher's credential?" And I'm like, "No." And knowing the process it takes to get to that, and so knowing that you were able to kind of reverse and get into the classroom first, and then the credentials following. But can you share? And I want this to kind of be like the transition into your experience into Kamehameha. What was that transition like? And and why the decision to go from a public school to now a private school where the system might be completely different?
So, um, the reason why I ended up transitioning to Kamehameha schools actually started from a trip that I took as an academy lead teacher with the Farrington High School. So our principal at Farrington was, he had this vision that he wanted to take the school and become a model school. And so to be a model school, there were certain parameters that the school had to meet, requirements that the school had to meet. And so for the academy lead teachers to understand his vision, they sent us, there was about six of us with three of the vice principals and our CAS. It's a complex area superintendent or somebody like that. So they sent us to Nashville. So the Nashville Academies it's one of the more established academies, and the way their academies were set up was actually because a lot of the local businesses were just fed up about getting students who are not ready for the workforce. And so all these businesses, I think Ford was the biggest one to kind of get everyone together. But the um, long story short, the academies there, they're considered a model district, a model school district. Um, and so from that experience, we went back to Farrington. The team of people who went to Nashville kind of got together. We put this presentation together, and we presented it to the rest of the faculty and staff of our complex area. And part of that meeting, there was some folks from Kamehameha schools that sat in on this meeting, and they really enjoyed the presentation and especially the way I was communicating to them. And so they kind of, came in and asked, like, hey, there we have this STEM academy that they're trying to build at Kamehameha schools. And it started out as one of their fall, spring, and summer break programs. So my last 2 years in Oahu, so this whole change kind of involved me moving from Oahu to the Big Island where I'm currently at. So my last 2 years in Oahu, I was helping Kamehameha schools. Um, there was a team of about four or five of us who was creating this STEM academy for the summer programs that we wanted to launch in 2016. And so 2016 came around, we ended up launching the program. Um, and then that same year, I ended up moving. My son just finished middle school that year, and I figured it was the best time to make a move. If it was going to be a big move, that we were going to come out here to the Big Island. And that position kind of transferred over here to the Big Island. So that STEM Academy, we launched the program. It went pretty well. We ran it for I think three years to where I had to be like really involved in that program. To the point where it was a solid, well-oiled machine. Um, uh, and then going from that to the classroom at Kamehameha schools. So these 3 years while I was building this STEM academy, I was not in a classroom at Kamehameha schools yet. And then I think in 2017, yeah, well, about 2017, 18, 19 is when I started to go to be on campus more often. And in 18 and 19, I was a teacher there.
Yeah. So, just back, just to pause for a little bit, because I think this is an interesting point, right, that you're making. This phenomenon around STEM, and if you don't know what STEM is, if you're just now tuning in, we are talking about his Malele, our guest, and his transition and experience really in the public school, and then now into the private institution, which is Kamehameha Schools. And STEM is stands for science, technology, education, or English for some folks, and then math. There's also the STEAM. acronym, which includes arts. But that is very much a public system within the entire popular education. So kind of taking that into the private institution, did you have to redress it in any way or kind of culturify it in any way? What was that process like? And was there any resistance into getting STEM into the Kamehameha schools?
I don't think there was too much resistance. I think there was a lot of excitement in going
Mm.
into STEM. And so the way that we kind of modeled our STEM program was through PBE, or place-based education.
Mm.
We took that notion and we or it was a concept that was being played around with in Kamehameha schools for a while. Um, Sadly, I'd say a little bit more than 7, 8 years ago, Kamehameha schools was really trying to push this elite student, in the American education system. So they wanted to have, the student who performed the best in their English classes. There wasn't so much emphasis put on the Hawaiian culture, not until about 7, 8 years ago. So about 7, 8 years ago is when they started saying, "Hey, we're a Hawaiian institution. We need to
Right.
start
Kapunas came.
focusing."
It was like, hold on, hold on.
Yeah, and and so about 7, 8 years ago is when they started to really push Hawaiian culture in Kamehameha schools, which was kind of blew my mind. I thought it was already automatic,
Right.
um, but it wasn't. And so part of this place-based education, they have this term called Hawaii culture-based education, HCBE. And so they created sort of like standards of what Hawaiian culture based education would look like. And we took that frame and used it as part of our way to build a STEM curriculum out of it. Um, One of the things that really worked well for us was Kamehameha schools. It's part of a trust that Princess Bawahi put together for educating Hawaiian students. The trust was put together so that it was almost like a promise that every Hawaiian student would get a good Christian education. And so um, part of that trust came with a lot of land, and some of these lands they're used for like commercial spaces. I think I mentioned to you before the broadcast that one of the big malls in Waikiki is like it's on land that is owned by Kamehameha Schools. That's part of this trust, and so you can imagine that's one of the biggest malls, and they created so much revenue from there, um, and all that revenue goes to the students. I mean, to the school system. Um, and so part of the other part of the land that they have are leased out to either researchers or farmers. And here on the Big Island, a lot of the KS land is they have some student researchers on there. They're researching how Kamehameha schools use certain, or not, sorry, not Kamehameha schools, how King Kamehameha used land division to create this huge food production system. And so we have researchers who are on these lands continually. They're excavating to see, doing their anthropological stuff on their lands, and they're gathering all this information. So when we bring in our STEM program, our students get to go on field trips to these places and meet with, we call them Aina collaborators.
Mm.
Aina is the Hawaiian word for land. And so the Aina collaborators is who we would take our students to for more of in-depth learning experience of that certain land, what Kamehameha, King Kamehameha did with those lands, um, and also just going through the different engineering processes that the Hawaiian people had in creating these massive, food systems. Um, and yeah, so those spaces is what we used as part of grounding our Hawaiian culture-based education STEM curriculum,
Right.
um, tying it right back to the land. And
That's incredible. That's
yeah,
incredible,
and
and
so
I just wanted to kind of give context to what funds KS schools. This is taken directly from the website. 96% of Kamehameha funding comes from the private foundation that you were mentioning, and that private foundation is really driven from the revenue from the land. And so when we take that and we compare it to our U.S. State Department of Education and where our funding comes from, you'll see that a majority of that comes from the state budget, comes from our Congress, comes from property taxes. And if you are to kind of go deeper in that conversation and see who are the voices that are really allowed to frame, like you were mentioning earlier, frame the curriculum that then gets trickled down into, in the case of Kamehameha schools, into the different school sites across Hawaii, versus our education system and who gets control and authority to create, establish, and then trickle down those subsidy programs to the education system, or the local education, the schools that are serving our students. Those are completely different systems. And I wanted to name that because that is so important, especially when we're talking about heritage in the classroom. It is not heritage that uh, our community, our local community, just came in and said, "Hey, school, we want to put our heritage in it." That's not how it works, unfortunately. That there is an entire um, ladder or assembly line, if you will. My goodness,
mhm.
of how curriculum is structured. And so when we're looking at Kamehameha schools and we're looking at how kind of like tightly knit and how I don't know if there's another word for it, but how exclusive the curriculum is when dealing with knowledge that we want to engage our students with. And you were talking a lot about the STEM program and the kind of switching it into the Hawaiian culture. Um, is that common practice for all ideas or programs that are coming into the school system that might not have been born out of Hawaiian based education? Is that common practice to take it and then kind of culturify it or kind of run it through the framework of HCBE? Is that common practice?
So the programs that I was doing for the summer, spring, and fall program was kind of like I'd say like an experimental phase for the regular school year teachers.
Mm,
And so if there was a teacher who wanted to experiment with a certain program, these programs, this summer, spring, and fall program is kind of where they would go to test it out. And so in the hopes that they, at the same time you're educating students in these summer, spring, and fall programs, but you're also building your own curriculum to take back to your regular students for the school year. Um, and then also during the school year, we have different workshops that we go through that help still further define what is that standard, what is that cultural standard. And so right now on so HCB is kind of the umbrella, um, and under that, over here, especially here on this campus on the Big Island, they call it OEV Edge. OEV is the Hawaiian word for bones. Um,
oh,
and so they're over here on this campus. I'm not sure if they're doing it on the other two big campuses at in Oahu and in Maui. But I know over here they're really trying to define what is the culture um, standard in the classroom. And over here they have, I think they meet twice a semester or something, with different subject area teachers, because now you have the standard, but then how do you apply it to each subject level? Um, um, and so yeah, it's really interesting. Maybe this kind of, I have to check to see, what's um, the copyright, deal is with commitment schools. But I mean, there are some stuff in there that, it's, uh, I have, you know, um, I really like some of the pieces that are inside this OEV Edge
Right.
standards. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm able to share that or not.
Right.
So
Yeah. I know.
you're
Definitely
gonna have to.
checking out those copyright rules. But
Yeah.
um, who makes up this standard, or who's the board? Is it a board, or is it a just a general committee of community voices?
So commitment schools at the very top is a board.
Okay.
I forget how many board members there are, but there is a board, and um, I think these ideas can come from anywhere within the system. It can
Hmm.
come from parents. Say there's an idea that good ideas that parents have that they think might benefit students. There's a way for parents to say, can we try this? There's a way for principals. There's a way for teachers to be able to kind of initiate some kind of learning experience or program through the school. I think there's formalities on how each level is able to initiate, um, you know, something like OEV. I'm not sure who initiated the OEV Edge standard, um, but it does, you know, the anywhere from within the system, you can try and create something, whether you're a parent, staff, principal, board member, anyone can suggest anything, and as long as there's some good research behind it, good data behind it, um, you know, they're open to it. And like I had to admit, when we were doing this Kilo Hana program, I was surprised on how much uh, budget was available for this.
Wow.
The my higher up was telling me, I'm asking, coming from public school, you get
Right.
kind of conservative on, like, dang, can I ask for this, or can I take this field trip or not? Like, is it within our budget? Like, I had to get used to not being so shy about asking those questions, because KS, they'll,
Right.
if it's worth the student learning, then they'll fund it.
Right.
And
That
they
is
do.
so, that is such a refreshing model, and to even hear that that is like a culture shock that you had to go through from the public to the private school, where it's an institution that prioritizes Hawaiian culture, Hawaiian learning, and then also to know that there's funding to back it up, like
Mhm.
that right there, coming
Yeah.
from an industry in a field where a lot of the culturally relevant programming exists solely within the nonprofit or within the community grassroots base. And I mean, you can ask any person if you're watching this and you are part of the nonprofit space, funding is very little, and it's minimal funding when it comes to culturally relevant programming, funding that we have to fight each other for some reason. And to know in contrast that this is absolutely not the issue with KS schools, that there is such a huge budget, and that I think the most shocking part for me is that it's coming directly from the land. Like that is incredible,
Hmm.
incredible. Yeah. So, with that being said, I know that we are 15 minutes, 15 minutes to the hour, and I know it feels like we've been having this conversation for like 5 minutes. This conversation has been so enlightening for me, and I'm sure for our listeners. If you are just joining in, today's guest is Malele, and he's been just building knowledge and sharing knowledge around KS schools, Kamehameha schools in Hawaii, and also his journey into Kamehameha schools. Now, and I hate to ask you and put you on the spot here, but as someone who is Samoan, and kind of seeing the state of Samoan heritage, perhaps even Samoan youth who don't have that education net, who don't have that safety net of learning their culture within the classroom. What would you recommend as an educator and as a Pacific Islander?
Me and my brother had this conversation, a couple of times, and um, to me, when I reflect and see how I learned my Samoan culture, it was not through school. It
Mm,
was at home, and in church. And I have a feeling, that there's within our Samoan culture, there's even within our Samoan culture, there's a variety of different ways us Samoan people do things. So, like our culture, from Whangaitua, where my dad is from, to Sekanga, where my mom is from, yeah, they're Samoan, but they might do Samoan things differently, you know? And so, to me, to learn culture that way, it gets real specific to what family you're from, what
mm,
village you're from. Now, imagine if somebody took that Samoan model from Sekanga, where my mom is from, and then brought it into the school. I'm only learning Sekanga's view of Samoan culture, and
wow.
so um, I one of the things about the Hawaiian community is, because they're relearning their culture, um, I think there are some subtle differences in the Hawaiian culture depending on where in Hawaii you're at. Um, but to me, I always thought culture needs to be taught at home and outside of school, because once you start bringing that stuff into the school, um, it starts to narrow down the culture instead of being this very variety of different experiences, culture experiences. Now you're starting to narrow it in school, because you're only teaching one way of the culture in the school. Um, and so uh, there's this one, Bruce Lee had this one quote, like, if you put water into a bottle, it looks like the bottle. And
Yeah.
so there's so I've applied that to culture and education, where, like, the American education is very, very rigid. There's distinct lines. Not to say that culture doesn't have the same thing, but to me, culture is more fluid. Um, it's more dynamic, and so what's happening to me is that um, I think Kamehameha Schools is kind of getting away from this, and which is what I appreciate. But a lot of what other schools are trying to do is they're trying to bring culture, put it into this American rigid system. Now you have this culture that looks like the water bottle.
Mm,
That's something that's supposed to be fluid. Now just you just put water inside of a water bottle. Now it just looks like the water bottle. Um, and so that's kind of my perception of that. Um, and yeah, if it was up to me, if the Hawaiian culture was being practiced like Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji, um, I would just say, hey, just leave culture out of this. You know,
mm,
we have to accept the point that this education that we're in is an American thing.
right.
And
That's so
so we have to learn the American way, and learn what Americans have to offer us, while at the same time be able to separate the two. Like, to me, I had this one conversation with one of my cousins, and they said like you can get as much PhDs as you want, but if you go back to Samoa and you don't know how to address your elders, those PhDs don't mean anything,
Right.
you know. And so, um, to me, it's like we have. If it was up to me, would separate the two. Understand that the education is a very American thing, and culture, our Samoan culture, is another very separate thing. And it's just almost learning 3, 4 different languages. The more
Yeah.
languages you know, the better. And to me, is the more cultures you know and understand, and you can play in each of these cultures. Like I can go to Samoa and be able to, serve my elders the way a Samoan is supposed to. But then I
Yeah.
can also go into the American system and be an entrepreneur, or build business and understand finances. Or I can go to, let's say if I was in Tonga, like as much Tongan information that I know, I can hopefully go over there and become a productive member in the Tongan community. But yeah, that's what my thought is about that.
Yeah, I appreciate your candidness and your honesty and kind of bringing to the surface and really to this platform of Busfika Voices podcast. Last week, we had our own High Chief Baba Li'i Manufo Liainga Anawai, and I asked her the same question. I think I just keep asking people the same question because one, everyone's perspective is going to be different depending on their first entry point into culture. Mine was through the classroom, and after years of having to unpack everything that I learned in the classroom about Tongan culture and then going to Tonga and understanding it for myself, I sit on this probably the um, same side as you. But with what she was saying, that and you have to kind of defend both because the American education system isn't going anywhere. It's so big, which means that there's just going to be an influx, a continued rise of folks that are learning and wanting to pursue, their PhDs and their masters in cultural studies, and because the American education system is built off of merit. They leave these education systems, and I am one of them. I will admit that thinks that they are the know-it-all. That because of my bachelor's degree, that I can go into any community and speak English.
Uh,
One, um, and then also speak on behalf of communities. And she shared. I'm sure that if you're watching this and you've watched the replay, you know what I'm talking about. That the textbooks aren't always right. We know this, and they aren't always the accurate reflection of our people. And that if you're learning the culture from the classroom versus a culture, you're learning the culture from the village, it is very apparent. You can read the room pretty easily when it
mhm.
comes to those types of um, kind of perspectives of learning the culture. And I appreciate what you said because I think as we are seeing more resources being placed into the American education system as the carriers and the system of responsibility for some reason to teach heritage to our children, we have to be the ones to say, actually, it was never your responsibility in the first place. And we'd
Mhm.
actually like to give that responsibility back to the village, back to our communities. So I appreciate you for saying that. I know we are on top of the hour right now. If you are watching Busfika Voices podcast, episode 11, we have our special guest, Malele, speaking on heritage and the American education system. Laulu, I know you've probably been sitting back absorbing the conversation. Is there anything that you would like to add or any questions you'd like to raise?
I think I'll summarize it. It also depends on what angle we talked about. There's this word called anthropology, and we remember Margaret Mead and the story she told. She wrote books and told all this stuff to the world about our culture,
Mm,
Pacific Islanders. A lot of us didn't like it. There was actually an article written by Queen Charlotte to, I think it was Vogue magazine, about this. And the misinformation of our culture, not understanding it. Let's just get straight. It's a white person looking into our culture telling what they see, but they don't know the nuances. And as long as they're writing the books on our culture, it's not going to ever have our angle on it. So usually, with Kamehameha, it's different because he was a king, right? Kamehameha
Yeah.
was king of Hawaii. So that takes a king to have, trust. They had in Samoa, they have customary land, Whanua Fa'apalangi, Whanua Samoa. Samoa is the customary land, and the other one is the freehold land. So you have this, it's the same thing. He has the same system there that we have in Samoa. The land that the family has and the land that they can use for commercial, industrial. They can put a McDonald's there. But the land that's for the family and the tribe, they can't touch that. So Kamehameha has that same system that's been going, we've been doing it before Christ, and it
Mm.
still flows through all the triangle. And I don't know if anybody's bringing emphasis on that because your family has land, right? And my family has land in Samoa. No
So
government can come in and mess with it. So I think that's a interesting view too.
yeah, so the when I studied, land ownership in Hawaii, it was very similar to what happens in Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji. Except I forget when it happened, but there's this event called the Great Mahele,
Uh,
Mahele. There were American businessmen who convinced, I don't know which Kamehameha it was. There was different generations of Kamehamehas.
right.
So I don't know which Kamehameha it was, but there was American businessmen who convinced one of the Kamehamehas and said, "Hey, the way you guys own land is not profitable." And so they convinced him to start sell or to bring in the American idea of land ownership, because back then it was almost like Samoa where no one owned land; it's all customary land.
That's very
Whatever chief title someone holds, that chief title is tied to a
right.
certain piece of land. And so it went away from that during the Great Mahele.
Was that
Um,
what century was that?
oh shoot, you know what? I wish I can look it up right now.
Okay. Yeah, because
But
that'd be interesting to find out because where that's a reference point that our people should know. I mean, like it came in a different sometimes it came through the eyes of the church or
mhm,
it came in through the eyes of a businessman. Either one, it was about power and control. And
yeah,
so our people were like, oh, this guy has good intentions. Maybe, maybe I'll help him out. But I think
yeah,
that would be interesting to see. And also interesting to see if that land is haunted right
yeah.
now. If by
So
yeah,
that's where it went away from the common Polynesian idea of land ownership.
passing down son
To
to father, father to son,
Right,
on and on, right? Yeah.
yeah. And
That's
in Samoa they have the saying, Samoa wa umana tofi. It's like Samoa is already
divided to the or given
um,
to the appropriate tribes and people. A
yeah, and
foreigner
so
can't come in and really just take over. But
right.
that's what colonization was. But that's another topic.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
it's like the people who steward or the chief titles that steward a certain land, according to Samoa, it's that never changes. Um, and so whoever holds that title is the one who stewards that land, and I don't think in Samoa it's ever going to change. They tried to do it this past election cycle. I think in
right.
2019,
19, yeah.
Tui Emperor tried to split up, these
Right.
lands and these titles, and then that's kind of what
We had
propelled.
petitions. Yeah, we had like, no, we don't want to change
Yeah,
that. So
so that's kind of
yeah.
what propelled the
So then it comes
grassroots.
down to the law. He's saying you go, well, let's look at the books, and everybody wants to be right. And so yeah,
Yeah,
that's another topic. But yeah, it's relevant to what we're talking about because this
yeah,
is before this education we call Western education. This is what was going on before that. Before the
yeah,
church, before structures, it was kings. That's it. Just and Hawaii was the only other kingdom in the South Pacific besides Tonga. So that
yeah.
was it. Those two were the main ones. But
So
at the time, yeah.
before we run out of time, like I want to share this one observation that I
Please, yes.
had. So you know how uh, when we graduate from college, especially from college, our family puts us on this pedestal, and they give us so much like accolades or good job and stuff like that. The only other time I seen that kind of accolade and congratulations was um after our Chiefs finished a Launga. And so I've never thought of it like that. Like when our chief gets up and does his speech, let's say it's for a wedding or a funeral or something, but after his speech is done, is like my family will go say, "Oh man, dang, good job! That was such a good speech," or it
Mm,
was like very congratulatory, and we put him on this pedestal because of the way that he spoke. He like elevated our family, and so to me, it's like the what do we consider the knowledge that needs to be passed down, as far as that's what education is, passing down knowledge, right? And so how do you do that? And so what I've seen in the Samoan community is that prized knowledge is how to do a launga, how to do a speech that would help elevate your family's status, sort of.
mm,
And to me, it's like you don't learn that stuff in the school, you know,
right,
um, in American classroom. So yeah, just
right.
thought I'd share that.
That's so good. And I mean, these are some of the conversations that we have within our organizational space at Anamatangi is the more students and young people that we can equip to say afakatapu, or in the Samoan tradition, launga, is that
Yeah.
it? To say a launga, we are better off in the race of preserving our heritage. And I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that. I thought you were going to say, are we um, putting a pedestal on individualism and autonomy and all those things? But clearly not. I was wrong. But uh, Mama, I really appreciated this conversation. You brought up so many different things, and I think prior to me restarting the podcast, I was afraid that there weren't a lot of people that were thinking in this way. And
Mm.
so, as you shared so beautifully your experience and also your personal opinions, in a world and in an age where this might not be popular opinion for some reason, that this might not be something that would, uh, you know, be seen as or be inviting to a space that is being had in our classrooms, or even in our community spaces right now. And so I thank you so much. I wanted to give you the last 2 minutes to just say any last words, or if anyone you want to shout out, and then also any businesses that you support or that you run, because I know you are a business as well.
Oh no, I just really thank you both for having me on, and yeah, I've the stuff I talked about, or just conversations that happen within my own family, and there's always a thought in my mind is like, man, more people should know about what we're talking about, and so but we never have that platform to do that. And so I really appreciate being able to come on and share some of the ideas. A lot of the ideas are not just mine; they're ideas that floated around my family for a while. Um, my mom, my mom's side of the family from Sekanga, there, it's generations of educators
Mm,
from Sekanga, and so that's one thing that we take pride in. Um, except I want to end with the um, this quote or this saying that my grandparents on my mom's side would tell their kids, um, and it was the the great grandparents sorry, my mom's grandparents would tell their kids to go get educated, otherwise they're going to become poor farmers. And so, you know, uh, a weird kind of quote to end with, but it makes us think about why they would say that.
Yeah.
Whether or not we today consider that to be a true statement or not. Um, but that's kind of, it's almost like a cliffhanger to have everybody kind of thinking maybe about a part two
Yes.
interview or whatever. But I think I was talking. Um, is it to Tiffany?
Yes.
Um, about this generation who came to America, who gave the emphasis to go into education, and whether to me, I called it the Polynesian experiment. You know,
Mm,
is this gonna be something that's gonna benefit our family? And to me, it's like I've always been told not to second guess what our ancestors, and our grandparents decided. Um, and so there's some value of that they seen in education, but the opposite of that is like, why did they consider farming to be a poor man's job? You
mm,
know, and so um, those are kind of the conversations that I would like to have with some folks. And
yeah.
did our grandparents have it wrong? Because we have this idea of our grandparents being these, like, wise people. And why would we second guess them? But when I hear stuff like that, it's like, man, I wish I knew where they were coming from, why they would say something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. Oh man, that is a true cliffhanger because you could run that through, the cultural landscape and how people are seeing agriculture today as a part of this thought and idea of elitism that if you can grow and produce your own food, you're better off. And yeah, that is a true cliffhanger. We do have to have you um, on the podcast again. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. And I wanted to give you just one last opportunity to share any thanks, or how can people get in touch with you if people are watching the replay and want to learn more about your journey and how to get connected to the work that you're doing. How can people find you on social media?
Yep. So my personal social media is ATSIXX at six, or just type in Malele Lia Malele on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me there. Um, but I also wanted to maybe do a little connection too with the Bay Area. My brother and his wife own the nonprofit Pie Fest. Um, and
I did
so
not know that. You're gonna tag them now at the end of the podcast.
yeah, so
Okay.
they just had their annual event a couple weeks ago, and so shout out to them. I've me and my brother keep in contact a lot, and I just know the work that they do out there, especially Lola and her family. Like, man, I wish our side of the family was able to be out there and be as helpful as her family is, because the impact that they're making out there, I just hear like nothing but really good stuff about them. But yeah, our community needs to start getting together. I told Tiffany, is like, it's good that our kids are starting to get together over there. But we need to start coming back to the islands. We need to start bringing,
Yes.
from this Polynesian experience, we need to start coming back, bringing whatever we learned from there, and start bringing it back to the places where, our great grandparents' bones are at, and
Mm,
um, start to find more value and create more value here in the Pacific.
that's so
So,
good.
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mela. I knew I recognized that last name, and I was like, "Wait, where am it now?" And literally, prophetic what you wrote in your personal statement, because I know that Falola also went to Berkeley, correct?
Yep.
Look at that! Oh my goodness. The next episode that we have you on, we have to bring your brother on. I think it would be such a cool quality entertainment for sure. Where both of you could speak to more to your family and how y'all got into the work that y'all are doing. And in the meantime, I want to thank everyone for sticking and tuning into this very special episode as we talk about heritage and the American education system and continue down this conversation and investigation on whether or not heritage should be in the American education system. If you want to follow us, if you want to join in on the action and volunteer, you can do so at our website, www.anamatangi.org. And next week, we have a very special guest as well, continuing on this conversation of land and heritage. So you don't want to miss out. Please make sure to follow us on our social media, on our Facebook, our YouTube, as well as our Instagram. And that is all from me. Laulu, do you have any closing words you want to leave before we end our broadcast?
Good night. Thank you.
And with all of that, good night.